Only 24 years had passed since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and the wheels of progress were steadily turning. Though hopes were high and intentions seemed virtuous, nurturing our newly formed nation would not be easy. European immigrants, now citizens of a new country, were struggling to shed the recent torments of war and were challenged with reestablishing commerce with Great Britain. At the same time, generations of an enslaved race of human beings had been suffering in great despair for nearly 200 years. On the night of August 30th, 1800, a 24-year-old slave who stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, a young man of great courage and intellect, set out to lead hundreds of other slaves on a revolt, intent on seizing control of Richmond, Virginia. His name was Gabriel Prosser. He was born into slavery around the year 1775 and was owned by Thomas H. Prosser of Henrico County, Virginia. Their goal was to kill all the white people, except the Methodists, Quakers, and Frenchmen, and establish a kingdom of Virginia. Earlier in the day, 2 slaves who wanted to protect their masters betrayed Gabriel and their plot to Virginia authorities, who quickly alerted the militia. An ill-timed rainstorm prevented Gabriel's army from assembling outside of Richmond, which gave the Virginia militia ample time to prepare a defense. Realizing their plan had been discovered, Gabriel and many of his followers scattered into the countryside. About 35 leaders of the revolt were captured and executed. But Gabriel escaped to Norfolk, Virginia, where he was ultimately betrayed by fellow slaves who sought to claim the reward for his capture on September 25th. Gabriel was quickly returned to Richmond and tried for his role in the aborted uprising. He was found guilty on October 6, 1800, and executed the following day. From Studio 37, welcome to the Mann and Perrin families of Western Iowa YouTube channel. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Brian Mann, and this is Episode 2, 1800 to 1810. This is the second episode of an 11-part video series about the Mann and Perrin families who settled in the Luss Hills of Western Iowa in the mid-1800s. So, you're probably wondering what the story about Gabriel Prosser has to do with my ancestors. Well, the short answer is absolutely nothing. My ancestors had no connection to Gabriel or the events that occurred on and after August 30th, 1800 in Richmond, Virginia. This is all about interweaving national historic events in and around the events and stories about my family, about my ancestors. The primary reason is for contexting. Determining which bright and dark historical events my ancestors perhaps had first-hand involvement in has been an important part of my research. Not only am I curious about their involvement in many of the formative events that shaped our nation, I am equally curious about their involvement in one of the most predominant and long-lasting American-made religions of our time, Mormonism, the principal branch of the Latter-day Saint movement started by Joseph Smith in upstate New York during the 1820s. We will share our current understanding of our family's involvement in some of those events in this and upcoming episodes. At the turn of the 19th century, my third great-grandfather, Nathaniel Mann, and my third great-grandmother, Mary Eunice Bennett, were living in Dummerston, Vermont. Nathaniel was 40 years old at the time, and Mary was 38 when the 1800 census was conducted. During the first half of the 19th century, the census documents only listed the names of the paternal heads of families. This changed in 1850, but up until then, the forms had columns by age ranges, under 10 years old, 10 to 15, etc., up to 45 and over, for free white males and females. There were 2 additional columns for all other free persons and for slaves. On the 1800 Dummerston Census, Nathaniel and his wife Mary are accounted for, along with 2 male children under the age of 10, older brothers of my second great-grandfather, who wasn't born yet. Nathaniel's father Timothy is listed as a separate head of family, along with his wife. And Nathaniel's younger brother Stephen is also listed on the 1800 census as a separate head of family, along with his wife and 1 female child under the age of 10. There are no other free person counts on Nathaniel's, Timothy's, and Stephen's 1800 census tallies, and, to my relief, no counts for any slaves.
Ephraim Perrin, my 4th great-grandfather, was just 18 years old at the turn of the 19th century. We know that Ephraim and his parents and siblings were living in Granville, New York in 1800. We have been unable to locate an 1800 census listing Ephraim or his father, Thomas Perrin VI. We suspect there is only one census that eludes us, as we presume that Ephraim was still living with his father in 1800 and is listed under his father's census counts.
A month and a half prior to Gabriel Prosser's aborted uprising in Richmond, the U.S. Capitol was moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. on June 15, 1800. 2.5 months after the attempted revolt, on November 17th, the U.S. Congress met in Washington, D.C. for the first time. On March 4, 1801, Thomas Jefferson was inaugurated as the 3rd president in Washington, D.C. On June 1, 1801, one of the future leaders of the Mormon faith was born in Whittingham, Vermont. His name was Brigham Young. On February 24, 1803, a landmark Supreme Court decision, Marbury v. Madison, greatly expanded the power of the court by establishing its right to declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. On April 4, 1803, my second great-grandfather, Richard Montgomery Mann, was born in Windham, Vermont. A month later, on May 2, 1803, the United States agrees to pay France $15 million for the Louisiana Territory, which extended west from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and comprises about 830,000 square miles, nearly doubling the size of the United States. A year later, on May 14, 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark set out from St. Louis, Missouri, on an expedition to explore the newly acquired Louisiana Territory and find a route to the Pacific Ocean. During their journey, on August 20, 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd died, presumably due to a ruptured appendix, and is buried on a high bluff overlooking the Missouri River in present-day Sioux City, Iowa. On March 4, 1805, Thomas Jefferson's second inauguration took place in Washington, D.C. for his second term as president. On November 7, 1805, the Lewis and Clark expedition sighted the Pacific Ocean for the first time. On November 24th, they moved their camp to the south side of the Columbia River near the present-day city of Astoria, Oregon, and constructed Fort Clatsop. On December 23, 1805, Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, was born in Sharon, Vermont. On September 23, 1806, the Lewis and Clark expedition arrived back in St. Louis, Missouri, successfully concluding their nearly 8,000-mile journey after 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days, and losing only one man, Sergeant Floyd. On December 28, 1806, Meriwether Lewis arrived in Washington, D.C., followed by William Clark, who arrived on January 15, 1807. At the end of February, Thomas Jefferson nominated Lewis as governor of the Upper Louisiana, and Clark is appointed agent for Indian affairs in the Louisiana Territory. On March 2, 1807, Congress passed the Prohibiting Importation of Slaves Act, which provided that no new slaves were permitted to be imported into the United States. The legislation was promoted by President Thomas Jefferson, who called for its enactment in his 1806 State of the Union address. He and others had promoted the idea since the 1770s. The law took effect on January 1, 1808. On March 4, 1809, James Madison is inaugurated as the 4th president. On October 11, 1809, Meriwether Lewis died from multiple gunshot wounds, one to the gut and one to the head. Whether or not Lewis died of his own hand or that of assassins is still up for debate today. This concludes Episode 2, 1800 to 1810 of the Mann and Perrin Families of Western Iowa Ancestry video series. We hope that weaving in a substantial amount of national history events has enabled a better understanding and context for the Mann and Perrin family events we've shared with you. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or bits and pieces of information you may have to fill in some of the gaps. We've included our email address in the description below. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on that notifications button to be notified when new episodes are published. Stay tuned for Episode 3, 1810 to 1820. We'll be publishing that episode within the next couple of weeks. With that, kind regards and thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.